All right. Well, we are recording. So we are in episode 7. So this is on work-life balance and professional development. And we have a very, very special guest with us today from Stanford University. I'm going to let her share a little bit about herself and her background before we get started on some questions. So take it away, Kathy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Davies. I'm the managing director of the Life Design Lab at Stanford University. I'm also the mother of 2 teenage daughters, 13 and 15. So when we talk about work-life balance, there's a little bit of work and life balance happening in my life right now. I'm here in my garage in Fremont, California. My background is actually in engineering. So grew up in California, went back east for college and studied mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering, actually. And so had a winding life getting to the point now of using design thinking to design lives and helping people thrive. So it's a little bit about me just before we get started.
Awesome.
Thanks, Kathy. So Kathy, you mentioned being in your garage. Have you always had the opportunity to work from home, or has that been a recent? Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about that experience, and then how do you think that has even affected your own work-life balance, especially with teenage daughters?
Oh my goodness. I would say, well, we were not working from home much prior to the pandemic. So that really shifted things for us and well, for people globally, I think.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate that I have a garage to work from and a space where I can close the door and be able to talk to you here on Zoom. But it has definitely impacted work-life balance because the separation is just a door. And so at any moment you could see someone come in who needs something. And shutting it down is a little bit harder. I don't know how you all have found it, but for me, it's convenient. I lost all that commute time, and meaning I now have that to do other things. And what I have found is I have used it to work. So a lot more than maybe doing some things personally or on the home front. So
yeah,
it's been interesting to kind of recognize that I'm not as good at drawing boundaries when I am in the same geographic location.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I totally, whenever we didn't get to be at home for super long. It was like 3 months, but I found myself getting down there earlier, jumping on the computer like 30-40 minutes before the work shift started. Afterwards, I'm like, oh, I just have to go upstairs. I'll just work on this and finish it really quick. And then my husband's like, Jess, it's 6 o'clock. When are you gonna head up here? I don't want to bother you if you're on a call or whatever. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. It is. I mean, I haven't been back in the office yet. So that's where we are in California. So I've been in my garage here for over a year and a half now.
Wow.
Which is a little crazy to think about.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy. So I want to ask you to tell us a story about how maybe a professional development opportunity has affected your career mobility.
Okay. Well,
I stumped you.
No, I'm just laughing because I want to tell this story in a condensed fashion. So I'd say I'm here right now because of a professional development opportunity. So when I was working in industry, I was working as a product manager at a software company. It's fantastic. A company called Arena Solutions, and was really enjoying that work. It was really interesting work, exciting work. And I happened to attend an event at Stanford where we were talking about really celebrating 50 years of the product design program. So the product design program has been at Stanford and has grown tremendously in the last 20 years or so. And I was a master's student there when I was, in my 20s, and in the 90s. So went back to that event, really thinking, this would be kind of a networking opportunity. This would be a chance to chat with folks, and ran into Bill Burnett, the author of Designing Your Life and also the founder of our lab, but also the executive director of the product design program. And I had known him in the previous context. And so was just excited to catch up with him. And in the process of them describing the growth of the product design program, they mentioned that they were going to be offering many more sections of some of the foundational courses of the program. And he was talking to somebody else by this time, but I sort of sidled up to him and handed him my business card and said, "It sounds like you're going to need more instructors." And then sort of sidled away. And about 6 months later, maybe a year later, he called me and he said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember this, but you gave me your business card at the product design celebration, and we do need more instructors. And I'm curious if you have time and energy or interest to get involved." And I said, "Yeah, I'd be really interested in talking about that." And he gave me a whole bunch of opportunities, from being a mentor visitor in a class all the way through to teaching the product design capstone course.
Yeah.
And of course, being the gung-ho person that I am, I was like, "Oh, I'll teach the capstone course. Like, this is great."
You sound like me, Kathy.
No idea what I was getting into. And so really had to do a lot of learning. And I will share that I started doing that as a side gig. So I was still working full-time in industry, and I got clearance from the tower that I could go ahead and leave the office a couple times during the week to go and teach this class, and taught the class, really enjoyed it, and had to learn a lot. So in terms of professional development, teaching did not come naturally to me at all. And which is interesting, because I gave talks at work, and I ran meetings, and I felt really comfortable talking in front of people in those contexts.
Yeah.
And certainly one-on-one, I enjoy talking to people quite a bit. But standing up in front of a group of students was a whole different animal. And I was really nervous. And after I'd been doing it for a quarter or two, I was talking about it with Bill, and Bill said, "I really just thought you'd be better at this." I said, "I know, me too." So, it really took some doing. But through all of that, I got pretty determined that, okay, this is good and interesting work, and I want to get better at this. And doing it just part-time isn't probably going to allow me to progress in the way that I want to. And so I ended up chatting with Bill about what would it look like for someone who doesn't have a PhD, me, to teach more full-time in Stanford. And he said, "Well, the product design program doesn't really have anything, but I've got this thing I'm cooking up," because this was in just after 2010, with my friend Dave Evans. We're working on this designing your life stuff. I don't know if it's going somewhere, but you should talk to Dave. Maybe there's a way that you could be a fellow. We hired a couple graduate students, and we've got a little lab that we're kind of cooking up here. You probably wouldn't want it though, because you're in your 40s and you have an actual job and make actual money. But I couldn't get that thought out of my head. And so I ended up talking to my husband about it. And I said, "Hey, I just want to keep working on this teaching stuff. What would you say if I decided to take a fellowship at Stanford for a couple years?" And he said, "All right, 2 years. We can't just abandon your tech salary, 2 years." So that was 8 years ago.
Love it. I love that.
So yeah, I don't know if that's a cautionary tale for you all out there, students, but yeah, professional development opportunities started with kind of a networking event, and then as a side hustle, something I just was trying to do, and then a realization that I really wanted to improve and get better at it, and here I am, suddenly in an entirely new job and loving it.
That's
I
awesome.
love that. I
That
love
is
your
such a
story,
great
Kathy. That's
story.
amazing.
Oh my gosh, I know. Well, when you think about that professional development piece, Kathy, like especially thinking about it from the student perspective, what would be that advice or that value as to why students should consider doing those types of things in college?
I mean, I think I'm kind of like a magpie. I always like looking at shiny things and picking up new shiny things. The process of trying something, of working on something, then you pick it up and you realize, wow, this shiny thing, this fits into, I don't know, maybe this is really stretching the metaphor, but like the crown of things I'm building, right? It's the next little piece. And all of a sudden you have skills and you have ways to connect the experiences that you've had that open up opportunities, and you meet people. So for me, I think the following one's curiosity, finding those shiny things, has always led to something interesting. And it's always led to me changing and growing. You know, like in that story I just told, I wasn't good at the thing at first. And I had a bunch of assumptions about how that would go. And it wasn't until I tried it, until I really stuck my foot in there, that I learned A, where I wasn't good, and B, how to get better. And so, and I also met all these wonderful people. I met you all. I met my students. I've met my wonderful colleagues that I work with. And that's changed me as a person and as a professional. And so the sooner you start that, I think the more people you meet who are interesting, the more interesting skills you pick up, and the more opportunity you have to have impact in whatever way it is that you think is important to help your world and your community. And I think that for me is what it's all about, is this idea of how can I have impact that I want to have with the people around me? How can I make the world, at least in my little corner of it, slightly better? And developing yourself as a professional is a great way to do that.
Great advice.
Chills, I know.
Yes.
I just
Great
love
advice.
it. I know. God, you're so inspirational.
You really are,
I don't know
Kathy.
about that.
We love you so much in our
I love you so
office.
much.
I always laugh because it was, the thing is, I don't know what I'm doing half of the time. I mean, more than half, perhaps. What I do know is what I want to accomplish in some way.
Yeah.
I have no idea how that's going to happen in a lot of cases. I have no idea really what's around the next corner. No one does. I mean, look at this past year, right? The pandemic threw all of us for a huge loop. And I had no idea that I'd be working from my garage. I had no idea that it was possible to teach on a computer using Zoom. So I think that when it comes right down to it, it's just having faith that we've got a process that we can work through ambiguity with. And I think that's the hardest thing, is A, accept, hey, there's a lot of unknowns and there are things we can't control. And then B, how do we have confidence, not that we know the answer or that everything's going to work out perfectly, but that we have what it takes to navigate all that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you were saying you created your list. I got to hear the list.
Yes.
What I found was, so hey students, they said, hey, create a list of your top 5 tips around work-life balance. And I had to laugh because as I just described here, garage, teenage daughters, the whole 9 yards. And so, you know, I don't even purport to having work-life balance figured out. That said, I do think there are some things that I'll draw from what I teach that I attempt to use as I think about balancing my own work and life. So I think the first one is, think about work life not as a zero-sum framing. Like the idea of work life isn't that useful, because for me that means if I crank up the work, my life is automatically gonna suffer, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And for me, because these things are deeply interrelated, in fact, the work that I do informs my parenting, informs my relationships, informs a lot of things. They're kind of intertwined. So A, it's hard to figure out where the line is between work and life, but B, having a more of a portfolio approach is useful. So in the book, we talk about work, love, health, and play. And I like that framing a lot because it just helps me think about what levers I can pull. And so really paying attention to, how am I playing? What am I doing just for fun? How am I taking care of my health? Because if I don't sleep, if I don't get exercise, I'm not productive at work. And I'm also just not productive in my life. And I'm kind of a bear to be around, quite frankly. So thinking about how that might work out. And then relationships are really, really important. And so thinking about, how am I investing in the relationships that matter to me? Be that friends, be that my family, be that colleagues. What am I doing to build the kinds of communities that I want to be part of? And how am I a good member of those communities? So that's number one, is maybe thinking about that portfolio approach is helpful to me. Number two, thinking about managing my energy as opposed to just my time. I'm kind of somebody who gets focused. So I look at things and I start working on them and time sort of gets away from me. Great flow state. But that also means I don't always thoughtfully think about what's going on with my energy, right? Is this an energizing task? Am I just like head down in it? Is it worth my time? Is it really going to be beneficial in the long run? How do I think about just managing my energy so that I'm getting the things done that are important to me, and then I'm not draining myself? So I like to think about that. Number 3, health. Kind of back to that health piece. So as I said just a moment ago, if I'm not healthy, I don't do good work, and I'm just lousy to be around. And in fact, I was looking up some statistics, and there's the whole, everybody talks about the 9 out of 10 startups fail. But one of the main things that investors look at when they're deciding whether they're going to invest in a startup to begin with is the health and well-being of the person who's going to be the CEO, which I thought was fascinating. Because what that means is it's understood, and there's a financial implication around, are you taking care of yourself so that you could potentially do good work in the world? And so it just really reminds me, especially sleep. And I feel like students, I'm talking to you, because if you're like I was when I was a student, you aren't sleeping nearly enough. Maybe for good reason, there's lots of fun things to do other than sleep, but do remember to take care of yourself, because if you're healthy, you'll be better at everything. Sports, you'll be better at school. They talk about how sleep, if you're sleep deprived, it's like being drunk. Think about that. If you want to do well, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You want to get investors? Take care of yourself. Number 4, and this probably maybe should be number 1, actually, now that I look at this list. Number 4, relationships are everything. So at the end of the day, your job won't take care of you if you're sick necessarily, right? They aren't the person who's going to bring you chicken soup. And your job will take everything that you're willing to give. And sometimes that's a good thing, because you're willing to give a lot, and you're working on things that really matter to you and causes. But you got to draw boundaries and make space for the relationships, because the people are really where it's at. And I think I've never done anything worth doing in my life without great collaborators. And I certainly think that my life has been immeasurably enriched by my husband and kids. And sometimes I get so busy with work that I forget to be the best person at home, as opposed to being the great person at work. And at the end of the day, oh my gosh, my daughter is 15, so she's going to go off to college in 3 years, which is crazy to think about. She'll be one of you. And so really remembering to seize those moments and to really be with the people that matter to you and prioritize that. I think that's a big one. And then my 5th one, and this is the one where I kind of failed, to be perfectly honest, but I'm working on it, is what I wrote down here was, when all else fails, consider how you make space. How do you make space to not do anything? Because that's where a lot of the best connections and sort of the magical meetings of people, and the creativity and innovation and just rejuvenation happens.
Yeah.
And we have, I can't imagine it's any different at UCN, but we have such a cult of productivity. People are bragging about, like, I stayed up all night to study for that test. And it's great that we have resilience and grit, and that we can work really hard at things, and that we're getting things done. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes doing nothing is the best thing to do, and creating buffer for something magical that you never would have planned for, that you wouldn't have even seen if you are so busy and so overloaded. And so, think about how to create space, maybe, is my last work-life balance tip. There's a great book by Manoush Zramarodi called Bored and Brilliant. And it's a little bit of a tech rant. So, heads up for those of you who are deeply, engaged with these objects. But what I really like about it is her talking just about the neurobiology and about how our brains, when we have that space, can come up with things, new things, ways to connect the dots that we can't when we're just running hard. And so, there you go. Those are my 5 tips.
I love it. Kathy, is there anything you do daily that helps support your work life? Like, out of any of your tips, or just anything that's like, this is something I do daily that really helps with that work-life balance?
I guess two things. The first one is I am trying really hard to do some form of exercise every day. And lately I've been trying yoga because that's something that has a mind-body connection that I'm exploring. So I am by no means a yogi. In fact, I'm probably one of the least flexible people on the planet. I can't sit cross-legged yet. I'm working on it. But I think there's something for me about getting some exercise that really matters. And then the second is, and I'm not as consistent about this as I should be. So daily might be overstating it, but I write down things I'm grateful for. So I have a little gratefulness journal that I just jot down things that I noticed during the day that either kind of awe me or that are things that just made me smile. And it's often things like great cup of coffee this morning. You know, it's not like world changing things, but what I like about it is it helps me just keep in a positive headspace because, you know, sometimes things happen that aren't so hot. And it's really easy to ruminate on those for me to focus on, oh, I should have done, or I wish I'd, and just focusing on those positive things helps keep me really appreciating what I have. I have so much. I have this garage. I have great coffee. I have wonderful family. I have wonderful friends. I have great colleagues. And sometimes in the heart of a small setback or something else, it can be easy to get discouraged. And so just remembering those things regularly is helpful for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've been telling them I've actually got a subscription to Apple Fitness, and they do the mindful cool downs, and they're either 10 or 5 minutes. But the mornings that I do them, even the 5 minutes, because they do like half of it is stretching and half of it is meditation. I listen, it's that, like you were talking about, that where you're just doing nothing. You're just breathing, you're just sitting there, just it's so I'm almost like asleep. I've like just done this workout and I'm like asleep. It's just crazy.
How great that you're giving yourself the time to do that and just to rest and kind of let things mull. And if your body needs to sleep, to sleep.
Yeah, it's so I can relate to you on that. I'm the same with yoga. Sometimes I feel like I can't even stretch right because I'm like, but yeah, I totally get that.
So many funny stories of me falling over trying to do yoga.
We'll have to hear those sometime, Gabby. I like to hear those. So you've talked a lot with us about your just the career of kind of getting from where you were to where you are now. And so I think one thing that I would love for you to touch on with the students is, you know, when you're thinking about a new career, maybe you're getting ready to graduate, maybe it's your adult learner and you're wanting to move and change, maybe in your encore career phase, whatever that is, where do you feel like the rank of work-life balance and professional development is important when you're looking at opportunities?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question. Are you saying as I'm considering picking job A versus job B?
Yeah, like when you're like kind of waving between like career moves, or, you know, I'm looking at jobs and I'm interviewing, and, you know, are those questions, you know, what kind of are those questions you should ask? Are those things that you should consider? Because I don't think, you know, I would probably guess students aren't considering those things, especially the, you know, ones that are getting ready to graduate.
Right. I do think they're very much worth considering. Professional development in particular in the early part of your career. Think about what kind of person are you trying to develop into? And as you think about opportunities, are these opportunities going to develop the skills to become that person? I think that's a really interesting question to ask. I also think that as we think about work-life balance, different stages of our life require different things. So in my 20s, I had no children, I had no partner. I was just working a lot and fine with that. There wasn't an issue that level, that was the portfolio balance that I wanted at that time. And so I think when we say work-life balance, that can mean different things at different stages of our lives. When I had my daughters and they were babies, I chose to work part-time because I wanted to be able to take care of them in the way that fit my particular values at that time. So, and then later as they grew elder, and then I had some different choices and I decided to go back more full-time. So I think it really varies depending on where you're at. So as a student, think about, well, what is it that you're trying to become professionally, and who is it that you're trying to become personally? And then how are you creating space for those things? And I don't usually ask the person who is interviewing me for the job about work-life balance. What I typically try to do is I try to talk to people who are doing the job that I'm interviewing for about their lives. Just asking them, what's their experience of working? When do they typically get into the office? When do they typically leave? What do the weekend commitments look like? I try to get that data in a way that's really about the other person and about the experiences of those who are doing the work in such a way that I don't have to ask about that in the interview process.
Mhm.
And, that may just be my style. My feeling is that someone who's interviewing me doesn't really care about my work-life balance. That sounds terrible. I really am painting employers in a bad light here. I think it's really important to recognize that employers are looking for someone to do a particular job at their company. And they, of course, want you to be a healthy and thriving individual. But at the end of the day, they're hiring you to do thing X. And what they want to know is, can you do thing X?
Right.
They don't really want to know that I want to rock climb in my free time. They might, then maybe that's something I have in common with the interviewer, in which case that's a lovely conversation to have. But they really want to know, can I do thing X, yes or no? And what am I bringing that another candidate might not bring that would make me do thing X in a better way than perhaps anyone else? And so I try to highlight that stuff when I'm having that interview conversation. And I try to find out about the work-life balance and everything in a way that kind of behind the scenes. Maybe that's a little bit too open kimono, but that's how I do it.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think it's straightforward, because I agree. I think getting to know, asking, I think it's so important to find really unique questions to ask when they turn it over to you. And I think the way that you worded that question versus like, so what's work-life balance here? They would be kind of like, because it's like you said, it's different for every person. It's so different.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to answer a question like that. So the way you went about that, I think, is key.
It's often before I even interview that I'm having these kinds of conversations, because I typically get excited about things pretty easily, as you probably have noticed. And I really seek out different kinds of experiences and things. I'm curious about a lot of things. And so for me, before I dive in and say, okay, I'm going to interview for a position, I need to get a little more data. And the way to do that, and that has worked best for me, is to talk to people who are doing the work. So that means I learn something more about the work. It makes me actually quite a bit better when I'm interviewing too, because I already have a little bit of background about what the problems are that they're trying to solve, and whether or not I'm interested in solving those problems, and what I might be able to bring to bear to help solve those problems that the company is working on. So it's just a useful tool in terms of interview prep, frankly. But also it gives me this sense of, are these the kind of people and the kind of culture that I will thrive with and in? So if I have the conversation, everyone says, oh, my boss calls me at 2 a.m. and right away, I know this isn't the culture that will work with my lifestyle, because I have already identified that I need to sleep. And so if the expectation is I'm on call 24/7, and that's the work culture, which some of my tech, friends, they're willing to live that life.
Yeah.
That's great for them. And it's also not great for me. And so knowing that about myself, I can save myself a lot of time and energy. I don't need to interview for that job, because I don't actually want that job. Or if I did do that job, I'd have to do it a different way. I'd have to draw different boundaries. And so recognizing, how have people done that? Is it possible to draw the kind of boundaries I would need to draw and still do that job well? That's something you can suss out ahead of time before you even interview.
Yeah.
Students,
that is
great advice.
Yes.
Great advice.
Yes.
I was like, yes. I was like, yes, Kathy, go, Kathy, go.
Yes. I don't know. I'm more of a cautionary tale, I feel like, in some ways, because, I think that I've done a lot of things wrong in my career than right. So I don't know. Take it for what you will, students.
Well, I think we're down to our final question.
Uh-oh.
So here we go. Final question. When you think about all the professional development opportunities that you've had so far, that you've experienced, what one has been your absolute favorite? Can you identify a favorite professional development opportunity that you've experienced thus far?
It's funny, because the thing that I'm going to say is actually not a professional development experience as much as it is a conversation that I had with a boss And so it wasn't, it wasn't like a workshop or something that I attended, but it was a moment that I felt like taught me a lot. And it was the moment that I realized that I don't have all the information. In the early part of my career, I always thought I knew what the thing was. I mean, I'd look at the technical problem. I was an engineer, as I mentioned, and product manager, and I'd look at the technical things and I'd talk to different stakeholders, and then I would come up with a set of solutions. You all know the design thinking process. So I would be following this kind of process, right? I'd empathize, I'd talk to the people, and then I'd define the problem, and then I'd come up with lots of ideas, and then I'd have a thing that I wanted to prototype, and then I'd pitch it. Okay, here's how I think we should develop this product. And I'd come up with this, and I'd be quite excited about it because I'd done all this homework. And I had, in this particular instance, I had an idea about how I wanted to run this particular project, and my boss and I were just really at odds. And we kind of went back and forth, and there was just a ton of conflict, and I didn't handle it particularly well. I was early in my career, and I wasn't as mature as I'd like to be. I'm still not very mature, but back then I was really working on it. And finally the boss looked at me and said, "Look, I know things that you don't know about the larger picture, and I need you to trust me. I need you to listen." And we still had some back and forth. Well, years later, he's like, "I was working on a merger, like with this other, like they were working on a merger, a company merger, and a bunch of other things that really informed how he needed the product direction to go. And he couldn't tell me any of it." And I think the thing that I took away from that, and maybe more in retrospect than in the moment, because I don't know that I really was still getting it right during that conversation, but I really credit this boss, Steve, thank you, in really pointing out to me, like, hey, be a little more humble. Like, take a second, because if somebody is asking you to do something, especially a boss or somebody in the company, they might have more information than you have. And so before you get all like, "No, this is what we should do," because I was very happy to do that, just recognize there's a lot of things going on, and that people have a lot of different pressures, both personally and professionally, that might be informing their behavior or the things that they need done. And give everybody grace, listen more, be more aware, and decide how you can really be helpful to the larger cause, not just sort of pushing your own agenda or your own idea, but notice. And so I guess maybe that's not the answer you wanted in terms of professional development opportunity, but that's certainly something that stands out in my mind as being a moment when I really learned something as a professional. And I really credit that conversation
to that moment.
Well, and I think that professional development can mean so many things, just like the work-life balance piece. I mean, that was a professional development conversation for you that you had that stuck in your mind. And
and that was, was 15 years ago or 10 years ago. That was a while back. That we had that conversation. And I really think that for me, professional development isn't really a thing that happens on a weekend or I'm taking a class. It happens all the time. I mean, I just read a book called The Inequality Machine. It was recommended to me by one of my colleagues, and about how the college admissions process in college can really divide us socioeconomically. And just reading that book is giving me thoughts about the work that I'm doing, and about how we might reach out to different kinds of students better, and how we can do the work that we think needs doing more effectively for more people. And so I just look for stuff like that all the time. What can I read? Who can I talk to? What experiences can I learn from that are in the world around me? And I have the great benefit of running a lab that works with universities all over the world. And so that means that I get to learn from educators much smarter and better educated, and who have more experience than I do, from 100 countries. I don't know if it's 100 yet, but it's a lot of countries. And so that means that there's an opportunity for professional development every day, which is, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I'm just very fortunate in that way.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that about wraps it up, Kathy.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
students, I hope it was okay.
No, you that was amazing advice. And
Great.
just
Oh my
you're such a
gosh.
storyteller,
You
and
are.
I could just sit and listen to you talk about.
Too.
I think you need to be, because on Apple Fitness they have these where people talk and you can walk and listen. These I think you should do one, Kathy. Side
Apple
hustle.
Fitness side hustle. I
Side
love it.
hustle with Apple
I love it.
Fitness.
I'm
I
trying
think you
to I'm
should.
trying to be braver about taking on new things that sound scary. That sounds scary, and also I bet it would be a great professional development opportunity.
I love it.
Oh,
Okay, well, thank you again, Kathy. We
Yes.
appreciate your time and the amazing advice and stories you shared with our students today. And I hope that they got a lot out of this. I know I can tell Amber and I both did. And
I'm just
we
like,
were-
oh my gosh.
I know. We just think you're so amazing, Kathy, and all the work that the
yes.
Life Design Studio is doing and has sparked such an energy in all of us here at UCM is just phenomenal. So
My pleasure.
excited to see where it all goes.
Me too.
Do we need to take our photo?
Yes. Here, hold on. I'm gonna stop recording here.